handed over that thing, your dark soul.
Yeah, this blows. What? Did you know that Dark Souls has a board game? It's not actually that weird, all things considered. The overall art style of the trilogy makes for some excellent miniatures, so I'm not complaining. What is weird, however, is what gets prioritized when making expansions for the base game. As of recording this video, Slave Knight Gael doesn't have an expansion for himself or an official miniature. Hence, I'll be giving you a tutorial on how to make and paint your own Gael miniature in the scale of the board game. Here is a small list of things you'll need to make your own Gael model.
Oh no!
Yeah, did I mention that this hobby isn't the cheapest one around? Starting out, I picked a pewter knight miniature from a hobby store. The scale of the knight was around 1 to 40, which should be ideal for the scale of 1 to 65 of Dark Souls the board game, considering how huge Gael is at the end of the world. The model was in a bargain bin, so sadly I can't give the exact name of the miniature for you guys. Just pick a knight model of the same scale that has similar armor to Gael's, and you should be good to go. Like with all things nice, in order to create something new, you must brutally murder something old. I started tearing at the knight's torso with a pair of clippers in order to get rid of the awful head and to make a cavity for Gael's hollow chest. After that, I used an old folding knife to smoothen the sharp edges and finish the cavity. Always cut against your cutting mat, because having to patch yourself up in the middle of the project is inconvenient. I also cut up the knight's arms so that I could repose and lengthen them if need be. At the same time, I got rid of the puny R1 spam straight sword the knight came equipped with. First, we need to talk about epoxy putties. In this video I'll be using green stuff and milliput, which behave similar to one another, but have some weird quirks to themselves. Both of these putties start to cure as soon as you mix the two components together. Milliput takes around 12 hours to cure and leaves a sturdy finish to your sculpture. Green stuff takes a bit over 10 hours, but is very elastic after curing. The weird part is that if you mix both of these putties together, the mixture will fully cure in just 6 hours. The cured mixture is an in-between the two putties, being a bit elastic but sturdy. Throughout this tutorial I'll be using said mixture to sculpt some parts of the miniature in order to make the process faster. We'll start by sculpting the basis for the upper torso. You can use your fingertips to smoothen out the surface as it's pretty big. Just remember to moisten your fingertips with water so that you don't leave any fingerprints on the epoxy. Or use a sculpting tool, whatever suits you best. Now that the hump is curing, I cut out a piece from 3mm thick plastic card. This will be the blade of what's left of Gael's greatsword. If your piece ends up too big for the miniature scale, just sand it out so it matches it. Remember that an overabundance of material is easier to fix than the lack of it. After I was pleased with the shape, I did some rough sanding to get the edges on the blade. Then I cut out the crossguard from 2mm thick plastic card, which I then glued in place using plastic glue. I also drilled the hole for the paperclip support that would go inside the blade later. Then I drilled holes in the arm pieces so I could put support beams inside them for the reposing process. I also drilled the hole through the right hand for the sword support beam. Then I started cutting paper clips into appropriately long pieces and glued them in place using super glue. After the super glue had dried, I filled the gaps with the Milliput green stuff mix. The leftover mix was then repurposed into the torso. I did some rough fitting and marked where exactly the arms would be glued on once the torso was ready. Now sculpting Gael's face is a bit tricky. In-game he conceals everything else except his nose and beard with the red hood. The concept art for him doesn't really help much either. Even the finest research methods give no results of any kind. Sure, you could go and harass the man himself with petty requests of showing some skin, but those don't usually go well. Face reveal, please. Pretty please.
No, fuck off.
Your best bet is to use the info data miners have dug up and base your own sketches on those findings. Or just sculpt the beard and nose and hide everything else under the hood like I did. We will not sculpt the head next, but it's good to plan ahead when doing bigger projects like this. Right now I'm sculpting the chest cavity using plain green stuff so I can get more organic shapes for it. I made some thin tubes by rolling epoxy against the flat surface, after which I started wrapping those tubes around the center of the cavity and flattening them out, adding progressively more layers until I was happy with it. Then I started sculpting the loincloth, which just consisted of extending the base model's loincloth over this chainmail. I also sculpted the armored boots, making them sharper than the original models, along with filling gaps here and there. After that, I made a roll of sandpaper and sanded out the swords fuller with it. Remember not to sand too much or you will expose the support beam inside the blade. Then I trimmed the crossguard to approximately the same shape as in game, along with making some bumps and nicks in the blade. I put a small ball of green stuff on the end of a paperclip piece to be basis for the head. Then I added some mass to the upper torso and did that test fit for the head and saw that I needed to shorten the clip. After that I did some upgrades on the elbow guards and sculpted the wrapping on the arms and the sword handle using thin tubes of green stuff that were flattened out after being carefully wrapped in place. I also sculpted the chainmail using a toothpick. Then I cut two small pieces from the 2mm thick plastic card and glued them on the Gael's left side using super glue. These pieces will be the bent open edges of the chest plates, so I made a seamless bond between them and the rest of the torso using green stuff. This is also a good place to sculpt over any details you don't need for a chest plate. After the back was done, I made the finishing touches to the front while adding cracks close to the cavity. Now that's done, you'll have to let the epoxy putty cure before continuing. This will take around 12 hours in total, so it's recommended to finish up this phase in the evening and go to sleep. Alternatively, you can do what I did and grind the Orphan Periloop at blood level 4 until you're about to lose it. Yeah, this is going to take a while. Now that the putty has cured, we can glue the head in place using superglue. Add some neck to your creation. After that, I sculpted the lower plates of the thigh guards, leaving the right one broken. I also added the lower edge to the chest plates front and back. Next you will need 2 pieces of baking paper and a ton of green stuff. Submerge the putty before spraying it out on the paper. After that, use something like a marker as a roller and spread it evenly across into a large shape. Use the sculpting tool to cut away excess putty. You want to get a shape that looks like the outline of a bird's wings, with cloth tatters looking like feathers. The putty will stretch during this, but don't worry about it too much, as it can be fixed later on. Bend the paper when you put it aside to cure so you don't end up with a plate. Now repeat this for the other cape half as well. I did some touch-ups where I had forgotten to sculpt details like the front of the loincloth or the pommel of the sword. Leveled Gael's intelligence by giving his brain some more space. I glued the arms in place with superglue. Now for the base of the miniature. You can use whatever appropriately sized base for your model, like the ones that come supplied with Citadel miniatures. However, I had access to a wood turner last summer, so I made a fancier one for Gael. Scrape both the bottom of the model and the base, so that the superglue has a good surface to grip onto. I added the remaining plates to the thigh guards and sculpted Gael's last remaining leather boot that he for some reason wears on top of his armored boots. Then I made some more tubes, but this time from the putty mixture. I trimmed the cape halves using a pair of small scissors and did some dry fitting. After that, I glued pieces of the tubes on the outer edges of the cape in order to get that root-like appearance the cape ridge has. The front of the cape was done by layering tubes of green stuff on each other and merging them with the sculpting tool. Then I made seamless bonds between the tubes and the cape with green stuff before finally gluing the cape pieces in place. I also did some more gap filling, more baking paper, this time for Gael's beard. Same procedure as for the cape, but smaller. After spreading the putty out, start making small dragging motions on it with a sculpting tool in order to create the texture for the beard. Slap it on and leave it alone. Expand the hump on his back. Roll small balls out of a green stuff putty and let them cure a bit. Cut them in half and glue them on the hump using superglue. Sculpt the moustache using the same tricks as for the beard. Fill any gaps between the lumps and the cloak, along with the back of the head. Finally sculpt the hood and the nose. Start out by placing the tube over his eyes and flattening it out. Sculpt a cone on his head and merge it with the rest of the cloak and the portion over his eyes. Remember to bend the end of the cone to replicate the look of his hood. Congratulations, the sculpting part is now over. Again, just let the putty cure overnight and get some rest.
Yarnum. How easily she forgets. How quickly she dismisses. Time is a cruel, cruel thing. Haven't you noticed?
Before you start painting, I would recommend you make a wet palette for yourself. For the palette you need a big lid. I used an old candy box lid that I had lying around. Pour some water on the lid and place a piece of baking paper on it. The water underneath the paper keeps the surface of the palette moist, which in return makes it so that paints on the palette stay wet for longer periods. This way you don't lose as much paint to drying as you would with a normal palette. I undercoated Gael using Vallejo's metallic paint Magnesium, which gives us a nice dark metallic foundation to work up from. You can achieve the same results by using a 1-to-3 mix of black and gunmetal. All of the paints used in this video are made by Vallejo, but you can use other brands as well if you don't have access to them or want to use some other brand instead. Next up I took some mahogany brown and filled it with water until it became like a watercolor. I applied this mixture straight on the metallic plates of the armor, letting it settle in the recesses. If it starts to pool up, remove any excess paint with your brush. After it has dried up, add some flat yellow to your mix and repeat the process. This time be more selective on where you apply the mixture. Finally add yellow and bright red to your mix and repeat the process while being even more picky on where you put it. Now that the rust effect is done, block in the leather parts and the chest cavity with black. For the next part you should use a small detail brush so you don't make a mess. Do a 1-to-4 mix of mahogany brown and black and fill it with water until it flows smoothly from your brush. Carefully paint this into the deepest recesses of the plate armor, defining the sharper edges of the model. Next up, start layering the metal areas using gunmetal. Remember to thin it down a little with water before applying it on. Paint it on the surfaces that light usually catches, leaving the darker magnesium in the shadows. For the sword, do some rough layering and then take a piece of sponge and sponge on some more gunmetal to create a worn look on the blade. You can also apply this method to the plate armor. Repeat with bright silver, but only highlight the extreme edges of the metal areas. You can also paint the rivets on the loincloth by doing small dots along it with the detail brush. After that, make a 1-to-1 mix of red and brown and paint the red cloth. If the red doesn't cover the black metal 100%, apply a second thin layer instead of one thick layer, so you don't ruin the details. Thin some of the mixture until it's very thin and glaze over the blade of the sword with it to give it a red tint. While that dries, block in the bandages and the skin using a 1-to-5 mix of flat sand and brown. Add some more red to the red and brown mix and go over the cloth, leaving the original color in the deepest recesses. Do this again with pure red while being more selective on where you paint. Paint some thin scratches on the cape using the dark brown mix from earlier on. Add some white and yellow to the mix and highlight only the most prominent edges of the red cape. You can also paint highlights under the dark brown scratches, creating an illusion of depth to them. Also paint the hollow of the sword with it. Add more white and only highlight the sharpest edges you can find. Also do some selective layering on the hollow. Thin the mixture down a bit and apply it to the deepest crevices of the chest cavity. Thin down red with water until it has a watercolor type of consistency and glaze over the blade and the cavity. Repeat this as many times as you see fit until you are happy with the color. Now mix some white and black into flat sand and layer the bandages. Add more white and repeat. Add a speck of red into the mix and layer the flesh areas instead. Add more white to the mixture and repeat the process. Do a 1-to-3 mix of white and black and highlight the black leather. Add more white to this grey mix and repeat. Add even more white to the grey mixture and block in Gael's grey beard with it. More white into the mixture and highlight the beard. Next you need some PVA glue and sand. Spread an even thick coat of glue on the base while being careful not to get it on the boots. A chopstick is very optimal for spreading it out. Sprinkle some sand on the base while not covering the glue entirely. Sprinkle some finer sand to fill out the gaps left by the last step. I don't have finer sand, so I used some fake snow instead I had lying around. Let it dry overnight before you paint on it. Paint over the base using a 4-to-1 mix of flat sand and black. Add a speck of white to the mix and overbrush over the base for a smooth highlight. Paint the trim of the base black and you're done. Now what do you do with your Gael model? Sadly, a miniature's usage is very limited, so most of the time they just end on the shelf. However, if you get close to it, you can hear faint whispers from eons beyond.
Merciful goddess, mother of the fallen, who have no place to call their own. For Ariandel, fire for Ariandel. Please bear witness to our resolve.
I fucking hate this game.
Spooky.